Hello there, and a very warm welcome to the program People, Politics, and Power. I am Imonia Marire. May 3 every year is World Press Freedom Day. That day was proclaimed by the United Nations in 1993, following a recommendation by UNESCO to reflect on the state of one of the most fundamental pillars of democracy, press freedom, and the expanding threats to civic space around the world. Nigeria joined the rest of the world community to observe the day over the weekend. At the heart of any free society lies the right of journalists to ask questions, hold power to account, and tell the stories that matter without fear, without censorship or violence. Yet, from newsrooms to the streets, this right is increasingly under siege. In Nigeria, journalists face harassment, unlawful detention, cyber attacks, and restrictive laws. Civic actors and citizens voicing dissent risk being labeled enemies of the state. The social media, which was once a frontier for democratic engagement, is now a contested battlefield of regulation, surveillance, and misinformation. This year's theme, A Press for the Planet, reminds us that media freedom is not just a political issue, it is an existential issue. The silencing of journalists, the shrinking of space for justice advocates, and the growing influence of vested interests in public discourse threaten not just democracy, but the future of the world. In this edition of our program, we ask, how free is the Nigerian media today? What are the implications of shrinking civic space for democracy, accountability, and development? And what must be done to safeguard the right to know and to speak the rights and to organize? These are the issues we'll be looking at, so join us as we engage voices from the frontiers. I mean journalists, human rights defenders, and policy advocates in a conversation that matters for the future of freedom in the media. I'm joined in the studio by two gentlemen who are in the front lines of media freedom. My guests are Dr. Iyobosa Uwugaren. Dr. Uwugaren is the General Secretary, Nigerian Guild of Editors. Thank you so much for finding time to join us.
Good afternoon.
We're also joined by Mr. Hassan Yahaya. Mr. Yahaya is the National President of the Nigerian Union of Journalists, NUJ. Thank you so much.
Thank
Mr.
you for
Yahaya,
having me.
joining us. We also expect to join us in the course of the program by Mr. Kola Oluwadare. Mr. Oluwadare is the Deputy Director, Socio-Economic Rights and Accountability Project, SIRAP. He will be joining us in the course of the program. Let's go on a short break, and when we return, we'll be diving straight on into our discussion.
Nigeria of our dream, the Nigeria we need, is the united, indissoluble, and cohesive Nigeria, which guarantees equity, fairness, justice, and prosperity for its citizens. That is our focus on people, politics, and power. It is fresh, insightful, impactful. It's a must-watch. People, politics, and power on AIT.
All right, thank you so much for staying with us as we take a look at World Press Freedom Day, which was celebrated over the weekend all over the global community. Nigeria was not an exception. And here we are going to be looking at how much freedom the media really has in Nigeria. What are the challenges that the media faces, and by extension, the general populace in Nigeria? Dr. Iyobosa Uwugaren is the General Secretary of the Nigerian Guild of Editors, NGE. So let's start with you. First, let's get an understanding of what the World Press Freedom Day is all about.
Yeah, like you said in your introduction remark, May 3rd every year is the World Press Freedom Day. It is a year set aside by the global community, to remind government, members of the civil society, and non-governmental organizations or pro-media right group, to remind the global community, including Nigerian, about the importance, about the essential of the freedom of the press and freedom of expression. It's also a day set aside to remind the government on the need for government authorities, security agencies to provide the enabling environment, for journalists to practice their craft without any inhibitions, without trample on our freedom of expression, freedom of the press. So it is a day set aside to also remind journalists themselves about the need for them to continue to adhere to the ethics of the journalism professions in discharging their social responsibility and the constitutional responsibility. And don't forget that in Nigeria in particular, we have the constitutional provisions that empower the media to, at all time, they didn't say once in a while, I'm talking about section 22 of the 1990 constitutions, that the media shall at all time hold public officers to account. So it is not just a social responsibility on the part of the media, it is also a constitutional responsibility. So it is a day set aside to remind the government that if you are talking about the core values, if you are talking about the oxygen of democracy, it is free press. Once you remove free press from democracy, you are indirectly killing democracies. So in Nigeria, we have a very serious problem, and that is why 2 days ago in Lagos, in a program organized by SERAP and the Nigerian Guild of Editors, we also use the day to also remind the government that gradually the civic space is being trampled upon. Today, most media houses, are afraid, to even publish and investigate government officials when it comes to holding them accountable for fear of being arrested and detained using the Cybercrime Act. And in the last few months, or a year ago, or in the last 1 year, the Nigerian police has been used as a tool, to trample on freedom of the press, because as a result of the act, many journalists have been arrested, including bloggers has been arrested, human rights activists has been arrested, using the Cybercrime Act. On our part, as professional media body, we are concerned, and that's why we call on the president and the federal government, the state government, local government, and other security agencies across the country, to be mindful of weaponizing the Cybercrime Act. We believe the Cybercrime Act was not created, to target journalists, to target human rights activists, and bloggers and other people who are involved in freedom of the press and freedom of the media crusade.
All right. So, Mr. Yaya, flowing from that, how free would you say the Nigerian media is today?
First of all, let me appreciate the United Nations for coming up with this day, a day set aside for us to celebrate, but it comes with mixed feelings. Sometimes we appreciate them for giving us a date for us, but at the same time, it is also a day set aside for us to look at the way we operate, the number of journalists harassed, intimidated, or even detained without trial. In 2025, a new red line has been crossed. The practicing of journalism is no longer guaranteed globally, likewise in Nigeria. And at the same time, we need to also look at issues at stake. What are the issues? One of the issues is economic independence. Most of the journalists and media organizations, they are no longer having access to funds. This is critical issues. Without having economic independence, there is no way we'll practice without fear, without any favor. So I want to use this opportunity and appeal to all of us, especially the stakeholders. Let's find a way of at least leveraging whereby media houses will be able to access fundings globally. But unfortunately, the issues is a global issue. You may recall what happened after the emergence of President Donald Trump the lockdown of Voice of America, which is worrisome. We never expect such things to happen in the United States of America. We felt United States of America is one country that is practicing democracy. This is to tell you issues of press freedom is a global issue. In coming back to Nigeria, I think we have a long way to go. I keep emphasizing these issues of economic independence is one issue that we need to emphasize more, because revenues are no longer coming to all media houses. Media houses are no longer paying salaries. This is a critical issue, and I want to use this opportunity to appeal to all other stakeholders, especially Guild of Editors, NUJ, Ratao, and other professional organizations, as well as international organizations and NGOs working in this thematic area. Let's work together so that we'll be able to come up with new salary scale or new remuneration for practicing journalists in Nigeria. And I believe with that we are going somewhere, and I'm assuring you, if we are able to scale through that, no doubt, and I believe that at the end of the day, we'll be able to have like revenues coming to Nigeria. Another issue of concern is issues of giant technological company who are dwindling the access to revenue. I don't want to mention names here, but I believe the revenues that are coming to various media organizations is no longer coming like we expect before.
So what we are saying, in effect, is that the freedom that used to be enjoyed by the media, or that is supposed to be enjoyed by the media, is encumbered by a number of factors, including, and very importantly, the economic situation in the country.
Absolutely.
Now we have talked about the giant technological companies. I mean, that's no longer news, but let's delve into that a bit. How is that really impacting on the Nigerian media?
First of all, I think we need to also look at and come up with new strategies on how we'll be able to get resources that are coming to this country. And at the same time, we also look at internal ways of at least generating revenue. And like you said, or I said earlier on, the giant company are no longer assessing or allowing smaller industries like radio stations, television stations to have access to direct sponsors. The giant company are the one blocking such access. And I think it is high time for us to find a way of at least making sure that we have like a leverage whereby industries, media television stations, radio stations will be able to access funding without hitches. And I believe it is doable. By the time we need to, at the same time, we need to also come up with what I call unbundlement, whereby stakeholders will come together so that we'll restructure the system. At the end of the day, people will be able to access funding without any restrictions.
Dr. Yobusa, let's push that a little bit further. I recall that at some forum last year or so, this issue of these giant media companies came up. And the discussion was around how African media organizations are actually suffering from the activities of these giant technological media companies. What has been the update between then and now?
Now, let me explain this. I think it was early 2024. Nigerian Guild of Editors and Media Right Agenda were invited to a global conference in South Africa. And at that conference, over 76 countries attended that conference. It was about how to engage the big tech. When we talk about big tech, there's no need to pretend about it. We have Facebook, we have Google, Instagram, we have other big tech, Google and others, that have that are impacting negatively on the revenue of the media around the world. So there was a conference in South Africa, and I represented the Nigerian Guild of Editors, and Edet Ojo of Media Right Agenda also attended that conference representing the Media Right Agenda. It was a 4 days conference. And at the end of the day, the 76 countries who attended that conference agreed that we should have a code, we should have a code that we can use to engage the big tech. And we came up with a code, and that code was widely circulated. Nigerian Guild of Editors also signed that code, including other countries around the world. The code was about how do we get this big tech to also share their revenue with media houses around the world, because they use their content. The content that we create, they use it, and they use it also generate money for themselves. And at the end, every year, they collect billions of dollars, using our content. So there was that code that was created. And part of that code was to also get legislative arms of the government of the countries that attended that press conference to also pass to back that code with law, I think since then, several countries have been able to enact law, to back up that code. For example, Canada has done that, Brazil has done that, Australia has done that, South Africa is also doing that, And when we attended the conference some time ago, we also raised that issue, and there was this agreement that Nigerian Guild of Editors should work, very closely with the UMPAN and NUJ, to also get the National Assembly to begin to have the conversations around that law. So we're in the process of doing that. So the point I'm making is that recently Facebook was threatening to also leave the country because the commission, that is in charge of monitoring consumers' protection also fined them about, is it $200 million? So, and we saw that as a blackmail, because whether we like it or not, we have this big tech who make billions of dollars every year using the mass media content, to promote their platform. And the whole world is saying that there's need for them to also share their revenue with the media. So Nigeria is also in the process of getting the National Assembly to start conversations around enacting law to also protect Nigerian media. Because whether we like it or not, one of the indicators of freedom of the press is creating the enabling environment for the media to operate. Like the NGA president said, over the year, mass media houses around the country is finding it very difficult to operate because of the harsh economic environment that has been consistently created by the federal government, by the state government, by the local government for them to operate. And unless we have a robust media houses, there's no way we can practice robust journalism. And once we're unable to also practice robust journalism, it will also affect negatively on the freedom of the press. We need to have independent press that can operate freely in a society, with enough economic power to be able to do that. Apart from the enabling, apart from the issue of security, human rights violations that we're also talking about, we also need to have an enabling economic environment for Nigerians to also practice journalism. Because if you have a media houses that is relying on the government, relying on private sector to regularly fund its operation, in order to be able to practice journalism, there's bound to be, free media, free press will also not be guaranteed. So that's why we keep on saying that the government needs to create the enabling environment for us to operate. And mind you, there's this agitation that there's need for government to also, assist the media. It's not just in Nigeria alone, because what I would like to know, if we're talking about democracy, media houses, free press is crucial to democracy. Around the world, government are funding media houses. And in 2024, the EU, for example, spent almost about 270 million euro to assist the media in that country, because they believe that the media is crucial to democracy. And for democracy to strive, you must have a very robust media houses. And the US is also doing that. So if we are saying that the government in Nigeria should also assist the media by way of maybe bailout, maybe tax, enabling media houses to import newsprint, brokers organizations to also import equipment without being taxed, then you are indirectly supporting the media to function very effectively. So the GID, for example, had a conversation with the Honorable Minister of Information some time ago, and the OPA is also discussing with the federal government along that line. I'm sure very soon we're going to have a middle ground on how the government can also assist the media.
The Newspaper Proprietors
Association of Nigeria. So
yes.
for the need for the federal government to also assist the media. It's not a matter of begging them to do that. We are saying that if we want to have a very stable democracy, looking at the role the media has played in deepening democracies, there's need for the federal government to find a way to also assist the media in order for them to play their role in deepening democracy in our country.
So from the NUJ's perspective, President, I'm sure the NUJ is aware of these codes that Dr. Wugane has
We are
talked
part of
about.
it. We are a strong advocate of that.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So I'm just wondering, from the NUJ perspective, what in concrete terms has the union been doing to guarantee some of these rights and freedoms that ought to naturally come to the media?
Okay, that reminds me, last year we were able to review our constitution because of the situation we find ourselves. And within the constitution, we felt at least we need to recognize reputable online media organizations that we felt they are doing the job rightly. So in the constitution before now, we don't recognize online or media organizations. But now with the new constitution, we are trying, it's already implemented. We have a clause whereby it indicated that all reputable online organizations are now recognized and they can form a chapters. And at the same time, NUJ is also a strong advocate of advocating to government to come off with this bailout, because we believe the situation is worrisome, and at the same time we need to also find way of assisting the media houses. Without funding, there is no way media organization will operate effectively, and I believe that will not also make the media houses to compromise. And at the same time, I think it is high time for us as also journalists also to believe in self-censorship. This is one thing that we need to also have at the back of our mind. I'm not a strong advocate of government to censor the way we operate, but self-censorship is also key and paramount, and I believe it is also very, very important for us as journalists to have that at the back of our mind.
All right, Dr. Yobosa, let me come back to you. You mentioned before the Cyber Act, Crime Prevention Prohibition Act of 2015 and amended in 2024. Beyond, we'll come back to the Cyber Act. Beyond the Cyber Act crime, what do you consider to be the other legislative or legal impediments to the practice of journalism in Nigeria today?
Well, thank you very much. Recently, the Nigerian Guild of Editors set up a committee headed by a very renowned pro-media rights activist, Mr. Richard Akinola. We also have a former MD of The Guardian, Madis Oloja, as member of that committee. The editor-in-chief of the Daily Trust, Hazen, is the secretary of that committee. The whole idea of that committee was to, to review all the anti-media laws, that is inhibiting, journalism practice. Because we discovered that some colonial laws that were enacted during the colonial era, today they are still part of our statutory book, that negatively affect media practice. And because those laws were not repealed, including during the military era, those decree number 4, several decrees that were created by the military, to gang the press, those decrees were not repealed. And because they were not repealed, they have become part of our statutory book. And the fact that people are not using it does not mean they do not exist. They exist. So worrying by the trend, we said, look, we need to, look at these laws and see how we can also draw the government attention to those obnoxious laws and see how they can also be repealed by the National Assembly. I think the Guild also had a meeting with the Minister of Information, and the Minister of Information is a very nice man who has done his job professionally, appeared to also be thinking along that line, that we need to see how we can free the media from this obnoxious obnoxious and anti-media law. So we're in the process of doing that. So we have laws, several laws, that are not good for our environment. When we talk about journalism practice, when we talk about freedom of the press, when we talk about freedom of expression. So the committee is working almost on a daily basis. And by the time the committee is done with its work, he will submit the report to the executive committees of Nigerian Guild of Editors. Then let's see how we can use that to engage the executive arms of the government in the National Assembly. Because the whole idea is to see how we can put this anti-media law before them and say, look, if we want to deepen democracy, the media houses, have a huge role to play. Because it's not about some government officials who have something to hide, who believe that if we have a free press, some of the things they are doing, some of their dirty jobs, will be exposed by the media. But we are saying that in the interest of democracy, in the interest of our national security, we need to have a strong media. Because go back historically, look at the role the media played during the colonial era. Look at the role the media played during the military era. the democracy, the little democratic space that we are enjoying today, we are championed by the media. At the point, some of these politicians were chased out of the country. They were abroad. It was only the media that insisted that we must have a democratic space. And we were able, through our struggle, we were able to push the military back to the barracks. So we are not going to sit down again and allow some of these elements, some political elite, who believe that if we have a free media, some of their dirty deals will be exposed. But in the interest of democracy, in the interest of deepening our democracy, you know, we need to have a very strong media. And if we must practice our journalism the way we should practice it, some of these obnoxious laws need to be repealed or reviewed.
So is the NG, for instance, considering a situation where after the committee that he has set up to review these laws has completed his work, is the NG thinking of maybe sponsoring a bill to the National Assembly for the repeal of or amendment of some of these existing laws?
Yes, I mean, that is our target. It could be an executive bill, you know, if we're able to persuade the executive arms of government through the office of the Minister of Information and the office of the Attorney General of the Federation. It could be an executive bill. We could also get somebody from the National Assembly to also sponsor that bill on our behalf. So, and at the end of the day, that is the target. You know, I'm sure that will be done maybe before in the next 2 or 3 months.
Okay. President, let's turn to the Cybercrime Act, for instance. When it was introduced in 2015, it was meant to address legitimate concerns around digital safety, such as fraud, cyber stalking, identity theft, and the whole lot of it. But over time, critics have said that act has now been weaponized by state actors, whether the executive or in fact or even by individual members of state to criminalize free expression. And here, when we talk about the Cyber Crime Act, we are not being criminalized or being weaponized. We are not talking just about the Nigerian media, but even targeted at individuals who want to express themselves in society, groups and organizations that are who take advantage of the provisions of the Constitution to do so. Now, so let's look at that. What is so offensive about the Cyber Crime Act?
Okay, first of all, after assuming a work as president of the union, I made a fight in my table, which involves about 4 journalists who were languished in prison because of Cybercrime Act that was used against them in Lagos State. It involves those journalists and one bank that I don't want to mention the name. And I know how it takes me like 5 months just to secure their bail. Thank God today they are released, but those journalists, they use Cybercrime Act to arrest them and also languish them in prison without trial. So, and at the same time, like Yebosa said, I think for us and at the NUJ, we are concerned with a clause within the Cybercrime Act, whereby the clause says that a journalist will be arrested and even detained and even put into prison for up to 6 months. I think this is worrisome. Journalism is not a crime. Likewise, NUJ is also advocating to see how we'll be able to see ways of engaging and collaborating with other stakeholders towards making sure that that bill is that law is reviewed, whereby journalism profession will be allowed to practice without fear or any contradiction within the country. And I believe it's something that is doable. But the most important thing, I am sincerely appealing to all other stakeholders. Let's work as a team. There is no way NUJ is doing something differently, NG is doing something differently, Ratau is doing something different, another international NGO or local NGO is doing something. Let's find a way of at least coming off and forming a coalition so that it will be a stronger coalition. At the end of the day, we'll be able to achieve most of the objectives we want to achieve within those bills that we want to review from the National Assembly.
Doc, can you share with us specific examples of where the Cybercrime Act has been used or has targeted journalists? Say in the last 1 or 2 years, for instance, even either journalists or even media houses.
Yeah, before them, I think there's need for us to conceptualize this Cybercrime Act. It is something that is that was demanded for by the global community. You know, the Cybercrime Act was is a product in many parts of the world. It's a product of the global cross-border crime, cybercrime, the issue of terrorism, issue of fraud,
laundry.
you know. So it got to a point the whole world
digital crime.
digital crime. So it got to a point the whole world was very worried about the increasing crime, the cybercrime, you know, around the world, and they believed that there was need for the global community to begin to have law, you know, to regulate what is happening in the cyberspace. The first country that enacted that law was the United States of America, who enacted the law in 1986. Within Africa, South Africa also follows suit. As I speak to you today, over 156 countries around the world, you know, have this cybercrime law, you know. But the intention of the law, like Riley said in your statement, is to target cybercrime. Cybercrime. That's the intention of the law, to fight cybercrime. Because if you look at the FBI report, like I stated about a few days ago, FBI, you know, came up with the cost of cybercrime around the world, and they stated that by 2025, which is this year, the global community will the cost of cybercrime is about $10.5 trillion around the world. You see the cost of cybercrime, of cybercrime. Then in Nigeria in particular, I remember last year or early this year, the chairman of the EFCC, the Economic Crime Commission, also said that in 2024 alone, Nigeria lost about 800 billion naira to cybercrime. This so-called Yahoo boy that we talked about. If you know the amount of money that these boys are costing the country, you will be shocked. And these are cybercrime. So I think that was the intention of the cybercrime, to fight such huge financial fraud.
Not journalists.
Not journalists. It was not targeted at journalists. It was not targeted at human rights crusaders. It was not targeted at bloggers and what have you. But unfortunately, we have a session in that crime, maybe session 24, that talk about arresting journalists and all that. And that's why the police, in particular, has consistently weaponized that section of the act, you know, to target journalists. So the point I'm making is that, in fact, in spite of that, there was a huge agitation for that section of the act to be amended. They have done that. In fact, I also remember that the human rights crusader, a lawyer, Femi Falana, senior advocate of Nigeria, also went to court, went to ECOWAS court, and challenged that section of the act. And he got a judgment against that act. So what am I saying? I'm saying that the police in particular, and that security agencies today, are using law that does not exist to prosecute, to persecute journalists, to prosecute and persecute human rights crusaders. That law does not exist again. It has been amended. As a matter of fact, the competent court of law, the ECOWAS court, also declared that section of the Constitution illegal. In other words, that section does not exist again. But you keep on seeing security agencies, especially Nigerian police force, using that act, you know, to arrest and to prosecute journalists in the competent court of law. For me, it is uncalled for. There is no need for that. It is not just the state actors that are doing it now. There are some even non-state actors, the so-called big men of our society. He mentioned the bank, Guaranty Trust Bank. There's no need to hide it. Yeah. They detain about 4 journalists for about 6 months without taking them to the court, using Cybercrime Act law. As a matter of fact, they were able to mobilize the Nigerian police force to detain those 4 journalists for 6 months without taking them to court. There was a time the president held a meeting with the executive director of the GTB over that. They were saying that, oh, we're going to prosecute them. If you want to prosecute them, take them to court and also give them opportunity to also defend themselves. But rather than taking them to court, they kept them in detention for almost 6 months without trial. So today, if you are a big man and somebody write a story against you that you don't like, you can get the Nigerian police to arrest that person. They detain them till their kingdom come. Apart from the security agencies, we also have some religious leader recently who also complained against some persons, you know, to the police using the Cybercrime Act. And those boys were arrested. They were detained in cell for weeks, for months. As I speak to you today, Showore is in court, facing trial. Today, he appeared in court today over Cybercrime Act. We have seen many journalists who have been arrested, who have been detained, who have been charged to court, using Cybercrime Act that has been declared by competent court of law as illegal.
The ECOWAS court actually declared Section 24, which is on cyber stalking.
Exactly. That is a section of the law they are weaponizing now to arrest, to detain journalists, human rights activists, and bloggers. That's exactly. If you read the charges against some of these people, they keep on referring to that section 24 that has been struck down by the ECOWAS court.
Yes.
So I think that is the point I am making. The way we are going now is they are creating fear in the minds of journalists. Journalists now, if they are even afraid to do an investigative stories, they are even afraid to expose corruption, because they believe that once you do that, and one big man, either in the private sector or in the public sector, complaining against you to the police, you'll be rest assured that the next day you'll be picked up, and they might detain you for months, for weeks, without taking you to court.
So, President, what do you think the judiciary, for instance, the legislature, and indeed the civil society, what role do you think they can play in reforming this Cybercrime Act, or indeed any other legislation that seeks to be weaponized against the media and its practitioners?
Like I said, I will repeat what I said earlier on. Coming up with a strong coalition will go a long way in resolving this crisis. I believe if NUJ is doing that alone, or NG is doing that alone, or someone somewhere else is doing that thing alone, there is no one will be able to achieve that. So I think let's form a strong coalition whereby we'll even go to the National Assembly and seek for a redress or seek for a review of that section that is attacking Nigerian press and at the same time bloggers as all other media advocates across the country. I think this is key. And above all, at the same time, we need to also use that within the time frame to sensitize our people. Let our members know the content of all those laws, because as I know a lot of us don't know the content of the law. You can't talk about the law that you don't know about it. So I think it is important for us as leaders of the union to sensitize our members, let the members know about the law first, and at the same time how they can use that law in their reports. I know a journalist in Nigeria today who is in a hiding for over 2 years because he's a publisher of one of the online organizations, because they have been looking for him left, right, and center. Police are looking for him, governors are looking for him, the media, some chief executives are also looking for him because of the nature of work he does as an investigative journalist. That is Wiki Times, and I believe that guy is hidden almost for almost more than 2 years. And I think it's at the same time we call government to allow this guy to come and see his family. At the same time, he's not been assessing his family. Nobody knows where he is. He operates from far. And I believe, and at the same time, I think it is high time for us as journalists to find ways of coming up with a coalition that is going to work towards reviewing that section of the law.
Dr. Yobosa, is it a case of ignorance or deliberate misuse of the law by the agencies that you complain of? Are we as journalists, as media professionals, doing enough to educate those agencies, and indeed also our legislators and even the judiciary, where they are eventually taken to, about the status of this law?
On the part of Nigerian Guild of Editors, we have consistently engaged the security agencies, especially the Nigerian police force. I remember we met with the IG of police twice in Lagos, trying to draw his attention to our concern about this Cybercrime Act. I think in one of the interactive sessions with the IG of police, he did mention that many of his men, I'm talking of Nigerian police now, do not even have the capacity to even implement that law. They don't even know the content of the Cybercrime Act. So in other words, when people complain about certain people, not just in Abuja, maybe across the country, what the commissioner police does is just to order the arrest of the person without even looking at the complaint of that person. They don't even look at the complaint of that person. So they arrest the person based on the complaint by somebody, and they detain them. So it got to a point the Special Officer of Police also said, look, any case that has to do with the Cybercrime Act should be referred to his office rather than, working on it at the state level. But even in spite of that, nothing has changed. So it might be safe for us to argue that the Nigerian police force are doing it deliberately, especially when big men are involved. I remember several people, senators, bank executives, businessmen, big politicians who complain about certain stories, that has been written against them on online publication. Once they complain about you, and of course they have the capacity to mobilize the Nigerian police force, to act immediately, and they do that. So it is safe for
the fact that there are laws of libel, laws of defamation
absolutely
that are
as,
there to
yes,
be exploited rather than the Cybercrime Act.
Absolutely. So it is safe to argue that the Nigerian police force and other security agencies are doing this thing deliberately. If you feel offended by any publication against you, you have defamation law. We have libel law that you can employ. Even there are some states where criminal defamation is also inexistent. So you can employ those avenues to charge the person to court rather than use the Cybercrime Act. And as a matter of fact, we also have in our constitution that you cannot detain somebody for more than 24 hours without taking the person to the court. But in this case, you have a police detaining somebody for 3 weeks, for 2 months, for 3 months, without taking him to court. For us, we see it as a deliberate attempt on the part of some state actors and non-state actors using the Nigerian police, to strengthen our democratic space. For us, it is not helpful to our democracy. And under a president, President Bola Ahmed Tinubu, who some people see as a progressive person, we don't expect him to allow such situations to happen in Nigeria under his watch. And that is why we continue to engage the government at all levels. It would have been worse. Because thank God we have a Minister of Information who has consistently intervened in some of the cases. Sometimes the security agencies also fight the Minister of Information. I say, look, the Minister said, look, I am the Minister of Information. If there are issues like this, allow me to handle it the way I want to handle it, rather than getting them arrested. So kudos to the Minister of Information, who on several occasions, has intervened in some of this. Other, it would have been worse. If we had the former Minister of Information that we used to have before during Buhari regime, it would have been worse. But today we have a very decent man as the Minister of Information who has acted on behalf of the media to save several cases. I remember the issue of The Guardian, the issue of the Daily Trust, and some other media houses that were attacked. They were attacked by the security agencies, but the Minister of Information intervened and save the situations. Even recently, even 2 days ago, during the World Press Freedom Day, the Minister of Information also insisted that the government will make attempts or will continue to create the enabling environment for the media to do their work. But it's not just about rhetorics. The minister must go forward, to inform or to persuade the executive arms of government, to repeal some of these obnoxious laws that are inhibiting free press in our society.
To add on what he said, I think for the first time we saw a Minister of Information working together with the National Security Advisor towards making sure that journalists are allowed to practice without using such laws to restrict them from practicing their profession. I think I must use that opportunity to appreciate both the two gentlemen for the wonderful job they are doing. And at the same time, we need more. And at the same time, let us also find a way of, like I said earlier, of sensitizing people to know exactly the content of such laws. Above all, also, let's also find ways of using our space to sensitize people the importance and the content of Freedom of Information Act. This is one law that I must appreciate the former president for assenting that law, and it is a law that most Nigerians don't know the content of it. I think it is important for media houses to use their platform for sensitization and education to all Nigerians in that regard.
All right. President, just before we go, I must ask this question. What is the union and the guild doing to get media professionals, our colleagues, to be more professional and more responsible in the discharge of their legitimate duties? Because some of these issues arise from some form of recklessness, one way or the other, by our colleagues.
For me, I'm still an advocate of saying that the more journalists are poorer, it is also going to be an avenue for enemies of press freedom to use against us. So let's find a way of increasing or improving the remuneration for Nigerian journalists. And above all, let's find ways of working together. I keep using that word. There is no way somebody is working elsewhere, someone is working elsewhere. Let's form a coalition. And at the end of the day, I believe we are going to achieve our objectives. And likewise, at the same time, I also want to use this opportunity to also use this opportunity because we are discussing about issues of press freedom. Records have shows that in Nigeria, less than 1% of Nigerian journalists have any form of insurance. It is important for us as leaders of the union to sensitize and educate and come up with new innovation of coming to see how our members will be insured, either health insurance or life insurance. I remember when I was chairman of NUJ in my state, I introduced insurance premium for journalists at that particular time. It's just 7,000 naira per head. And at the cost of date, a family will benefit from 1.5 million naira. Few months down the line, after payment for all journalists in the state, one of us who is a very young journalist died. As I'm talking to you, the house his family are living today is courtesy of that 1.5 million naira. More than 18 years ago, we bought a house of 1.2 million naira. That house today is worth more than 15 million naira. If, for instance, we have such insurance to all journalists, there is no way our children after death will be begging. I think it is important for us as leaders of all unions to come up and prioritize issues of insurance and at the same time prioritize issues of remuneration for Nigerian journalists across the globe.
On a final note, Dr. Ugari, you did talk about this at the beginning.
Yeah.
Ethical conduct by journalists. And I cite one example, just last week or so, one of the online media platforms reported that the president has sacked a number of ministers, which turned out to be untrue.
Absolutely.
I mean, and we have situations like that repeatedly. They always come up and all of that. How do we begin to get our colleagues to be professional, responsible, and ethical in the discharge of their duties?
So, Imoni, like every other professions, there's always bad behavior within the professions, and the media is not exempted from that bad behavior. Yes, I agree with you. We're also worrying about this unethical conduct. I give you a few instances. There was a time, a day before the tribunal delivered a judgment on a Edo election. So many newspapers reported that a judgment was leaked. And so many newspapers reported that stories in the front page, quoting a leaked judgment by a tribunal. And that judgment was not signed. They reported it, and they were quoting judges in their stories. And I was shocked. So many prominent newspapers and media houses online reported that stories. For me, news. That is unethical conduct. Several cases like that. So the point I'm making is that we're not saying that we are perfect, but we're saying that there should be a deliberate effort on the part of media houses, professional associations like NUJ, Nigerian Guild of Editors, to continue to train and retrain our colleagues. But we're not going to say because of the bad behavior, people who are affected should capitalize.
Of a few.
Of a few, they should capitalize on that, to ruin the media industries. You remember there was a deliberate attempt on the part of the NPO. When you're talking about the NPO, you're talking about the NUJ, the Guild of Editors, the Newspaper Proprietors Association of Nigeria, and Bond, where we set up an ombudsman headed by the former editor-in-chief of The Guardian, Emeka Ezeze. We also have that professional, eminent people, scholars, jurists. The former NBA president is also part of that ombudsman set up, where we encourage members of the society that if you feel aggrieved about any media report against you, report to that ombudsman committee, and they have the capacity to deal with the issue rather than going to court or rather than even using a lawsuit,
which is a global trend.
Which is very common among so many people now. So we are saying that there's an avenue for people to complain. I remember when Daily Trust did a story that the federal government was not very comfortable with. Rather than going to court, they approached ombudsman, and the ombudsman, look at the issues. After several weeks of sitting, they came up with a report and advised Daily Trust to apologize And they apologized.
They did.
And they also advised the federal government for subsequent event, the federal government should also find a way to be open when it comes to access to information, so that they don't create room for such speculation. So at the end of the day, that matter was settled amicably. So we have several cases that ombudsman, has handled, in the interest of the media industry. So we are saying that I'm using the opportunity to also appeal to members of the public that if you feel aggrieved, if you are concerned about ethical conduct of journalists, in our society, there's an ombudsman that you should report to, and you can be rest assured that in next few days you will get a result. Right. Rather than going to court, that will take years to resolve.
Thank you so much, Dr. Ugare. Well, that's where we're going to be drawing the curtain today. What we have learned here on this discussion is that the free media is not a luxury. It is a lifeline for democracy. And yet in Nigeria, that lifeline is currently under pressure. We must remove that pressure, and that is by looking at offensive laws, and even laws that do not relate to the media that are being applied to stifling media and free speech. We must begin to see that development cannot happen if we do not have a free society. Gentlemen, I want to thank you very much for your time. Alhaji Hassan Yahya is the national president of the Nigerian Union of Journalists. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you for having me.
Dr. Iyobosa Ogane is the general secretary of the Nigerian Guild of Editors. Thank you so much for your time. Unfortunately, Kola Oluwadare of Serap was unable to join us on the program today. But that's it for now. And please tune in again when we bring you a fresh edition of People, Politics, and Power. Bye for now.